Welcome to POTUS 2016, where we call the presidential horse race and pour cold hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. I'm Brian Lehrer. Both Hillary Clinton's basket of deplorables comment and her lungs have gone viral. Can her pneumonia and her calling half of Donald Trump supporters racist, sexist, etc. get erased by a great debate performance? Or maybe the extraordinary good economic news is the cure? The Census Bureau just reported that incomes are rising sharply on every rung of the ladder, the most in nearly a generation, and that poverty rates are falling. This happy news undercuts Trump's dark view of the economy, but then again, things could be even better, especially for suburban women who Trump needs to win. So all of a sudden, he is pushing hard for 6 weeks of mandatory paid maternity leave, claiming Clinton has no such plan and never will. Actually, though, Hillary called for 12 weeks of paid leave a year ago. So how should the press handle such misleading rhetoric? Media columnist for The Washington Post, Margaret Sullivan, will join us shortly. But with less than 8 furlongs to go, let's get right down to the track. Yes, time for the horse race. Clearly, it was politically unwise for Hillary Clinton to toss half of Trump's supporters into that basket of deplorables, but some numbers appear to back her up. A June Pew Research Center poll took the temperature of Republicans on issues that relate to Trump's appeal. Pew found that among the Republicans who hold the view that newcomers to the U.S. threaten American customs and values, about 60% of those people view Trump warmly. Among the 3/4 of Republicans who think the Islamic religion itself is more likely than other faiths to promote violence, 56% felt warmer towards Trump. And among the minority of GOP voters who say it is bad for the country that in 25 years or so, African Americans, Latinos, and Asians will make up a majority of the population, nearly 2/3, 63%, look upon Trump warmly. Over half, very warmly. And what did voters think about Clinton's health issues? Morning Consult found that 44% of registered voters believe that Clinton's health will negatively impact her ability to serve. And her handling of the issue isn't helping with voter trust. 50% said that Clinton has given false information about her health to the public. Just 37% said the same of Trump. Trump was seen as 9% more accurate. But will these bouts with pneumonia and the truth be enough to tip the scales toward Trump? With just 8 weeks until the election, a clear path for him has yet to emerge in battleground states. National polls have begun to tighten, and as expected, those results are beginning to show up in state polling numbers. That increases the likelihood of more toss-up states. But because Clinton still has a firm grasp on many high-value states, Trump will need to win the vast majority of smaller swing states and without losing some larger ones like Ohio and Florida. So with such a tight race, it's no wonder why Americans are getting testy about the press coverage of their candidates. Clinton supporters see the media going easy on Trump. Meanwhile, Trump rails at the press as biased against him. This year of extremes is clearly testing the media. Are they failing the test? Joining us now is Margaret Sullivan, media columnist for The Washington Post. Sullivan served 4 years as the New York Times public editor, whose job was to critique the paper's own coverage. She was the first woman to hold that position at the Times. And welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. Great to be here.
So let's see. You wrote a column recently called, "Yes, the press should treat Trump fairly, but even better, hold him accountable." Do you think those two things are at odds?
Not at all. I think that's what the press should be doing all the time on every subject when it comes to public officials, is treating everyone fairly and, when appropriate, holding their feet to the fire. So it should be obviously not just done for Donald Trump, but also for Hillary Clinton. And I think I've seen some of that, and probably not enough.
So in what instances, for example, and of course it's hard to lump all of the media into one category, there are so many outlets.
Yes. Yes, I mean, that's a great distinction. Are we talking about, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the National Enquirer, Breitbart? It's very difficult to talk about the media. So I think when we do in this situation, we're probably talking about some of the mainstream outlets, CNN, the networks, the Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal. So I think early on, Trump was not taken entirely seriously, and he was given a lot of media attention for just showing up, and it was sort of a sideshow. I think that the coverage has gotten tougher in recent weeks. Certainly at my paper, the Washington Post, there has been some very tough reporting, including a full book called Trump Revealed, which looks at his entire history, and it is in fact very revealing about who we're looking at here. Hillary Clinton, because she's had such a long history in public life, and some of it in public office, we know her better as a whole. So I think there are real differences, and of course the candidates themselves are so very different. That one of the things that's come up is, in an effort to treat them both fairly, are we going too far in that direction, in the direction of a sort of false equivalency or false balance?
And that's the cry on the left. Usually
That's
is
right.
False equivalency. On the right, the cry is liberal balance,
That's
liberal
right.
bias.
That's
I should
right.
say.
Exactly right.
Maybe both of those things exist to some degree?
I think that it's very difficult to, I actually do think there has been there have been instances of false equivalency, because Trump has so many things that I think would have disqualified another candidate, and yet he magically seems to roll on. And so, we know what Hillary Clinton's issues are. Her email issues are one, but do they get overstated because of the number of things that Trump has going on? And I think they do sometimes.
Yeah. So if the worst things that she has done that we know of are being extremely careless, as the FBI director put it, in putting classified type information on her private server, okay, extremely careless,
Yes.
Not trying to hurt the country, or no untoward results from that, as far as we know.
That's right.
National security was not actually compromised, or establishing some meetings as favors to donors to the Clinton Foundation without changing U.S. policy or sending money their way.
Yeah, and honestly, Brian, I think even that story has been overstated. In many cases, these were meetings that were going to happen anyway.
In some cases they were. And I'm not trying to say Clinton good, Trump bad, but the kinds of questions that the media has to ask are those on the one hand, and on the other hand, questions of bigotry going in so many directions from Trump, the possibility of his authoritarian leanings if he were to get into office, and the qualifications that he has, lack of knowledge in so many fundamental policy areas. These are fundamentally different kinds of questions
They are.
that the media has to ask about both candidates, each candidate. But I think I hear kind of an equivalent, breathless tone when describing each of them.
That's right, I agree. And we're set up, the media is set up to cover two roughly equal candidates. We have reporters who are with them at all times, or try to be with them at all times. That hasn't been as easy as it once was. But we're not really set up to cover such an unusual candidate as Trump, and I think it's caused real structural issues and some internal questioning that does need to happen. I don't know that as a whole we've covered him very effectively.
You wrote a column with the debates coming up, 5 things the moderators must do in the upcoming debates. And number 1 is maintain control. You think that's not a given?
No, I am sure it isn't. I think that there's going to be a lot of effort to be the dominant player here. And Trump is so difficult, I think, to pin down because he moves quickly from one subject to another, and it's hard to slow him down. I think it's going to take a lot of both finesse and a very stiff spine in order to really rein in the tone and the sort of the direction of these debates.
Yeah, that relates to your item number 5, which is actually my favorite on the list, which is be willing to pursue a logical line of questioning with repeated follow-ups. To me, that's 3/4 of the battle. And with what you call Trump's ADD tendencies, really he tends to stray from the question so often. And then I think the temptation for the moderator is to either go where he leads or just leave that question at wherever he leaves it and go on to the next question.
That's right.
Because it became such a jumble.
Yes, I think that's right. For my column, I interviewed Jim Fallows of The Atlantic, and he gave, I thought, a really good example of Chris Matthews following a logical line of questioning and with Trump on the question months ago of his beliefs on abortion. And because he pressed him and followed through, he was able to elicit from him, something that ended up as pretty big news, which was that he thought that if the laws were changed and abortion became illegal, that there would have to be, as he put it, some sort of punishment for women. Matthews was able to pursue that logical line of questioning and get Trump to be more specific. And that's relative rarity.
And in fairness, Clinton has her own ways. They seem less jumpy, but of talking in generalities and other things that also avoid questions and beg follow-ups if the moderator is prepared.
Absolutely. Every politician who's effective goes out there wanting to stay on message. They have certain kinds of things they want to say, and they're going to say them, whether the question is actually about that or not. And I think it's the debate moderator's role to make sure that the actual questions get answered.
So let's play a couple of clips from the one almost debate that there was, the Commander-in-Chief Forum on NBC the other week. And here's one clip from that, and you'll see why we're playing this, and then we'll talk about it.
I've always said, shouldn't be there, but if we're going to get out, take the oil. If we would have taken the oil, you wouldn't have ISIS, because ISIS formed with the power and the wealth of that oil.
How are we going to take the oil? How are we going to do that?
You would leave a certain group behind, and you would take various sections where they have the oil. They have, people don't know this about Iraq, but they have among the largest oil reserves in the world, in the entire world. And we're the only ones. We go in, we spend $3 trillion, we lose thousands and thousands of lives, and then, Matt, what happens is we get nothing. It used to be to the victor belong the spoils. Now, there was no victor there, believe me, there was no victor. But I always said, take the oil. One of the benefits we would have had if we took the oil is ISIS would not have been able to take oil and use that oil
Let me stay on ISIS
to fuel themselves.
Let me stay on ISIS.
And he said, let me stay on ISIS, but he didn't say on some of the things there that seemed to warrant follow-ups that Trump had raised.
Right. Well, the primary one of which was at the very beginning of the clip, where Trump says he opposed the war in Iraq from the very beginning. That is not the case. It's just not true. And many people have looked into it, and including the Washington Post fact checker and all the other fact-checking organizations. It's just not the case that he opposed it from the beginning. He actually said some fairly supportive things early on, and then by 2004 had said something when everyone else, many others, had changed their mind at that point too. So Matt Lauer got pretty well pummeled for not calling him on that, because it's come out before, and it really is a place where Lauer should have just stopped him.
And within the answer, of things that Trump said we should do, when he talks about leaving a few people behind to take the oil, well, that's a very complex task. Seizing oil fields and then defending oil fields in Iraq and Syria. That's not, I don't believe in large-scale military deployments. We can just leave a few people behind. That's a really complex thing, and everybody's going to be attacking that oil.
It was said in very general terms, and even though, it was good, I thought that Lauer pushed him, well, what do you mean? How are you going to take the oil?
Right.
But he really didn't. He really didn't answer that question.
Right, and even the to the victor go the spoils makes it sound like we were the victors in Iraq, the United States,
well, he
rather
quickly
than on
did,
behalf of the Iraqi people.
Yes, he did say there were no victors there, believe me. So I think he backed off of that. I don't know. I don't think it made a lot of sense.
But that it kind of smacks of colonialism if we have the right to take the oil. So that's another
right.
follow-up question that could have been asked.
That's right.
Here's a little bit of Hillary Clinton in that same forum when it was her turn.
When I became Secretary of State, the Iranians were on a fast track to acquiring the material necessary to get a nuclear weapon. That had happened the prior 8 years. They mastered the nuclear fuel cycle, they built covert facilities, they stocked them with centrifuges, and they were moving forward. What was our decision? Our decision was to try to put together an international coalition that included Russia and China to exert the kind of pressure through sanctions that the United States alone could not do.
Right, but you said that you think you're going to cheat.
Look, this is an important issue. I know we're on TV. We don't have a lot of time.
I want to get to a lot of questions.
I will talk quickly. But I want people to understand this. So, yes, I put together the coalition. We imposed the sanctions. We got them to the negotiating table. And after I left, we got the agreement. That agreement put a lid on their nuclear weapons program and imposed intrusive inspections.
All right. And there, I don't know if it's Matt Lauer so much as television and the fact that they each had only a half hour. And the imperative, for whatever reason, from the producers is, I want to get to a lot of questions.
Right.
As came out of his mouth.
That's right. And she really rolled right over him and stayed on exactly what she wanted to say. At other points in that Commander-in-Chief forum, she actually stood up and kind of stood partly in front of Matt Lauer, so that he would have had to have sort of yanked her on the arm to get her attention. It was an interesting move.
We've just participated in something that I think I've seen in the last week or so since that forum, which is maybe more deconstruction of how the moderator did in a thing like that than we generally see. Maybe than we've ever seen before, but certainly than we generally see.
That's right.
Do you think it's something about this year?
Well, one of the interesting things about this forum that we've been looking at is he didn't even have both of them out there at the same time. So, I guess arguably could have been easier because I think during the debates, and as you know, and as everyone knows, there are going to be 3 of them, 2 sort of normal format, 1 with the town hall. I think that there's going to be a lot of talking over each other, and there could be some rather disruptive behavior, and it really calls for strength and a lot of preparation on the part of the moderator.
Are they going to be relatively free-form debates in that respect? Because sometimes, and I tend to personally think this is worse, you have these stilted debate formats where one gets 90 seconds to answer a question and the other gets 60 seconds to rebut. And, it's clear and it's defined, but interaction is probably good to some degree, and there needs to be some looseness with time, I think, in order to get into some depth.
Right. I'm not completely familiar with what the format's going to be, but I do think that they're going to be wanting to circle back around to what each other said in a way that doesn't address the question that's on the table at the moment, and that the moderator is really going to have to keep them in check.
your point number 2 in your article, 5 things the moderators must do in the debates, is be well prepared enough to assert the truth in real time. And that's a somewhat controversial statement among moderators of debates. Why is that not up to the other candidate to call their opponent on?
Well, it should be, and I suppose it will be. But I do think that there may be an opportunity to simply say, well, actually, no, that's not the case. And Chris Wallace of Fox has been forthright about saying he's not going to do that. I think they should be willing to do it, particularly on something like this Iraq question, which has been so worked over, and yet Trump continues to say it over and over. And, you know, people do start to believe it after a while. And I think somebody, maybe it will be Hillary Clinton, but if not, then the moderator needs to be able to say, nope, that's actually not the case.
I've actually been struggling with how to understand the Chris Wallace comment, because he actually does exactly that on Fox News Sunday. Yes, and I actually think he's one of the best at it.
Right.
Among those Sunday show moderators.
Yeah.
Do you think he was saying he's going to do something different than he does on Sunday morning, or he was just saying, you know, he's not going to be the ultimate fact checker and he's really going to do the same thing that he does on Sunday morning, which would involve some of that?
You know, as you say, Chris Wallace he's an aggressive, moderate, interviewer who does hold people's feet to the fire.
And he does his homework. He's got facts on the set.
Absolutely. So it is a little surprising. I think it relates to this business of not so much, you know, am I going to force the truth out, but rather, am I willing to play the role of the fact checker? Which, you know, has happened at different times, I think somewhat famously, and I can't come up with the details, but Candy Crowley once fact-checked and it wasn't right, and I guess it can be a tricky area, but there are going to be some things that are just going to call for that, and I hope that they'll all do it.
Trump has called in recent days for there to be no moderators in the debate. Now, it's too late for this year. This is obviously not going to happen. But what do you think about that idea, hypothetically?
It's a terrible idea. It's I think that would result in chaos. And it's not, you know, as you say, Brian, it's not going to happen. But the reason that he brings it up is that after the Matt Lauer interview, there was so much criticism of Lauer that he thinks that the next person out is going to be particularly tough on him, on Trump. And I think that he's trying to push back against that preemptively.
There are people in the kind of progressive camp who like the idea of a moderator-less debate, who say, oh, the Lincoln-Douglas debates were an ideal once upon a time. And so why not have 90 minutes of unstructured time between the two candidates and let the American people see them unfiltered by a Chris Wallace or an Anderson Cooper or whoever it is?
I mean, I guess I just don't think that works in this situation, that there needs to be there needs to be a grown-up in the room, and I'm not sure it's going to be either one of the candidates.
How much do you think media economics, especially contemporary media economics, is hurting the quality of presidential campaign coverage?
Well, that's a big question, and it's one that I think about a great deal. I think that many local newspapers who used to cover all kinds of things, including campaigns, are no longer able to do that in the way they once did, and so you're probably getting fewer voices than once was the case. You know, I think the big papers, the big networks are still staffing at a very high level. So I don't see it affecting things there.
And what about the fact that we have basically 3 cable channels on television that are 24/7 presidential campaign coverage for like a year and a half? We've never had that. And these cable channels have existed for a while, obviously.
That's right.
But they've never been full-time presidential campaign channels, which in effect they've been for some time now. And maybe it's a good thing.
Well, one of the things that this has brought about are these surrogates for Trump and for Clinton who we've become, all too familiar with, who seem to be on all the time representing the point of view. And some of them, aren't particularly good. And, I think that we'll all be fairly happy to see them go away.
Plus, I think one of the worst things about the campaign coverage is that those channels are so driven by ratings that that's what led early on to many, many, many Trump campaign speeches getting, full wall-to-wall coverage,
right.
Whereas other candidates did not.
That's right. He definitely has driven coverage and driven readership and driven clicks. So it is difficult for people to walk away from that.
Margaret Sullivan, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Brian.
We'll be
This has
reading
been
you in
fun.
the Washington Post. And that's POTUS 2016 for today. But before we go, a glimpse at our guest next week. He is Ian Bremmer, global affairs expert and president of the Eurasia Group consulting firm, with whom I did a live event on the day after NBC's Commander-in-Chief Forum with Clinton and Trump. I asked Ian about the undecided voters who might now hold the key to this election.
I think that the group that is undecided is mostly turned off and disgusted, and that they feel when they watch both, whether it's last night or at any of the ongoing overwhelmingly long and saturation coverage. There's nobody who there out there thinks we need another 2 months.
For all we complain about how long our presidential campaigns are, that maybe it served a purpose in that it kind of took most of this time for people to realize how scary Donald Trump might be.
I think you're right. I also think it took this long to get lots of Americans, like those living here in New York, to recognize just how legitimately angry a large number of Americans are with anything that smells establishment. Now, here's the problem.
That's true.
Despite the fact that it's taken 18 plus months to realize that, I think there is a much higher than 50% chance that we will completely forget those lessons after next January.
No disagreement for beyond that. Ian Bremmer, an extended excerpt next week. We're here each week at this hour, calling the presidential horse race and pouring cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. Less than 8 weeks to E-Day. Not too late to register. Most state deadlines are around October 11th or so. Check your state. As President Obama said in Philadelphia the other day, and this applies to all citizens, don't boo, vote. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.